Right, thank you so much for coming today, Jez. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Jez, I'm an addict.
And how long have you been an addict for?
I was in addiction for over 3 decades. About 35 years as an addict. It's something I think, even before I picked drinks and drugs up, I was already an addict with addict traits and behaviours. Whether it's nurture or nature, becoming an addict, that's debatable, but I've always been an addict, yeah.
So how old are you now?
I'm 49.
49, so from the age of 15, is that good maths?
It is good maths, but because I've been in recovery now, coming up just shy of 18 months.
Right.
So when I started my recovery journey, I was 47. So I actually picked my first drink up and cannabis and stuff around the age of about 13.
Wow.
Yeah.
What would you say your biggest drug struggle was?
So I've tried a lot of drugs, and in the 90s and stuff, the rave era, it were a lot of ecstasy, amphetamine, acid and stuff. It felt very much like a party in that era. I did a bit of MCing in the clubs, and it sort of like kept me thinking that I was just a young lad just living life, and I felt like drugs at that point gave me something that my life had been missing. They kind of filled a void, but that quickly progressed onto heroin, and then by the age of 17 I was an heroin addict. So
wow, that's so young.
Yeah, I progressed very quick through the gateway drugs and onto the real drugs, and so by the age of 17 I was an heroin addict, and by the age of like 19 I'd already started using crack as well.
When you were you injecting heroin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did get to and also very early on.
Wow.
So from the age of about 16 was the first time I ever used any drug intravenously, and that were amphetamine. And then once you've started on that sort of journey, it don't matter what drug comes your way, it seems to find its way into a pin.
Wow. So how did you get introduced to it? Would you say like it was a rave scene?
Well, I'll tell you a tiny bit of my backstory. So I grew up on a council estate. I was born in the 70s, but growing up in the 80s, there were a lot of BNP, a lot of National Front. It were a very different sort of time. And there were a lot of racist kids on my estate, and there were a lot of bullies on there. But not everybody who were a bully were a racist, but everybody who were a racist was a bully. And they made it shit for me. And so I never felt part of, and I never felt like I fitted in. I had an afro, everyone had straight hair, I was brown, everybody were white. I didn't like my colour, I didn't like who I was. And it put me in a strange position where I hated being me. I didn't like being me, and I didn't like being black. And then at school, I couldn't read or write. I don't know if dyslexia was a thing back then, but...
it wasn't diagnosed back then, was it?
Really, no. And by the time they diagnosed me with it, I was leaving school. I left school around the age of about 14, 15, because I was never there, because I couldn't read or write. It weren't a good place for me. Sporting wise, excelled. Runner, footballer, rugby player, awesome. Loved it. Felt like that was my calling. But anything else other than that was painful. And so not feeling a part of, when I eventually picked cannabis and drink up, and then this sort of like, all of a sudden I felt like I could MC and I got a bit of attention, and that's when it started to feel like it was filling a void for me.
Do you find it easy to make friends?
Yeah, making friends were never difficult, but even making friends was strange, because I'd have things like, some friends would say to me, and they'd be good friends, you know, sometimes they'd say, oh, we're just going to go to my house and get a glass of water, but you're not allowed to come. Do you know what I mean? So I had weird things like that. I always remember once there were a girl who were in my class. She weren't a girlfriend, we were just kids together. She said, do you want to come to my house and do some homework? Well, I could never do homework. Basically, come to her house and copy her work. And I was over the moon with that. And I went and sat there in her kitchen. And there was a mum was washing the pots. And me and hers were sat at the kitchen table. And the dad came in his work clothes with his orange visibility jacket on. And he walked in and he just stopped shockingly and looked at me and just went, whoa, what's going on here? We don't want nobody in this house you can chalk on. Yeah, and that was the experiences of being young, that sort of
How old
stuff.
were you then?
I was still at school, so I'd have been 13, 14. And, you know, and I didn't even know what a cotton picker were when they used to call me a cotton picker. I didn't. Do you know what I mean? I was young, and they had different terminologies back then. You were a wog, you were a coon, and yeah, and so I was exposed to it. And I always remember this was quite sad when I reflect back. Now this is how difficult it was for me in my struggles, but my dad were a very peaceful bloke. He's from Sierra Leone, Africa, and he was a very sort of like straight, a real respected man of the community, even though there was a lot of racism about. And I always remember occasionally going to watch football in the pub with my dad, and they'd point up at telly and they'd say, "Fuck these niggers, they fucking wank, but you're alright, Jim." You know what I mean? And in this strange, horrible
dynamic,
where they'd say this grotesque stuff about blacks, and then try and
include him.
But you're alright, but you're alright, Jim, as if we were separate from this race. So I grew up very confused about my colour and how I fitted in society and in my community.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It caused a lot of confusion.
And you were obviously you saying you're only black kid on the estate.
Yeah, well I had siblings, but they were older.
Yeah.
And they were all they all kind of did really well and very quickly left our community. Like a sister off being a teacher, 2 brothers were professional footballers, and they were off very quick and out of the community. And so I was left in my community with my mum. My dad died when I was like 12. She was my best friend. Yeah. For her trying to raise a young, dyslexic, black kid as a white, getting old lady now, it was difficult for her. And as much as I loved her, the dynamic was broken down by me and my search to fit in. Started looking at the wrong people in my community as role models. People that were selling drugs, people that had cars, people that had money. I wanted that life, and I wanted to be that guy that people respected. There were people in my community that I didn't like. There were racists, but I respected them because they were feared people. And this is why I was confused and conflicted. And as I started to become older, and I started selling drugs and that, I started to earn some respect off these people. I'll never know my dynamic fully, but my perception of it was people did start to fear me and did start to respect me. Yeah. And that became a drug as well.
It's like fuel to the fire, isn't it? Just
really
even more, yeah.
Yeah. And so...
another addiction.
Another addiction, which I'd always been a little attention seeker anyway. Yeah. But now, you know, I'm getting to that age where I can go out and I can do this, and so all of a sudden, that kind of compounded this problem I had with drugs. Now we've got a dangerous combination of ego mixed in there, and I had a massive ego, but one thing I do know is I had low self-esteem. Yeah. Which actually, it sounds like a contradiction, but actually low self-esteem can fuel a big ego, and it did exactly that for me.
There's no surprise with the way you're explaining your childhood that you've got low self-esteem though. Yeah. So from that point then, you sort of said you went into selling drugs and taking drugs at the same time?
Yeah, of course. I was selling and using drugs. And I will say quickly, because it's not something I touch much on, but throughout all this, there were fleeting moments of like jobs. I played semi-pro football, and there were fleeting moments of trying to get back to the sanity, trying to get back to being an acceptable member of society, but it felt like my addiction had got too much of a grip of me, and I used to think that using drugs was, well, everyone has a drink on a Friday, or everyone does this on a Friday, I'll make my money on a Friday, I'll sell some drugs. And it was through my lack of understanding of addiction that kept me trapped in my addiction. And once I started like selling drugs and starting to know people, and then a few little jail sentences, which is networking in a way, when you get in them environments where you're in jail, you meet people from other ends, they're drug users / dealers, and I just became somebody for whatever reason. In that life I felt like I was somebody, and I felt like I thrived in it. I felt like other dealers kind of respected me in it, and so that lulled me deeper into my addiction, which now was off key. By the age of 20, I'd been in rehab, I'd been in jail. When I got out that first rehab, I think this is important, I went in that rehab with a massive reservation. I went in that rehab thinking, I just want to learn to manage my drink and drug use. So like normal people, go on with all-inclusive holidays and just use drugs like everybody else, odd weekends here and there. And then when I come out, and then when I come back, you know, don't use and stuff. So I went in this rehab thinking, if I can get through this 12-month programme, when I get out, I'm just going to have a use up as a reward for getting through rehab. So I went into rehab with a massive reservation. The reward for getting through rehab would be a use up. After 9 months when I got out of that rehab, I used that day and stayed in a 27-year relapse.
That's crazy.
Never got clean again. So I weren't really clean in there because I was clean, but I wasn't mentally clean because my reward was going to be
that you could do it, yeah.
Yeah. And so, as you can imagine, so then, and like I say, and then I caught a couple of little jail sentences here and there. And
what were the jail sentences for? Selling?
Well, so I got, so my rap sheet's similar to a lot of people who've been about that life. So on my sort of, it's burglaries, dwellings they're called, car thefts, possession of drugs, intent supply, and then mainly violence. I was somebody, especially when I'd got drink and drugs in me, could become very erratic and violent. I think what happened was all them years of being bullied almost felt like it were training to become a bully. And I only know this now, having been on a spiritual journey and doing this work that I do on myself, but I also know now that the reason I was a bully was through fear. I was scared of being the bullied. I was scared of being the victim. That little boy who was getting whipped and called coon. They once beat me up and pulled skin off my chest with pliers. They did some horrendous things to me, pissed on me. I was so scared of being that victim again that I felt like one of my best tools to not being a victim was to be a bully. And that's how I counteracted it. So life became very confusing. And like I said, there were fleeting moments where I had jobs and I did this and that. But
you're still using all the way through those,
always used. Would
you say you were functioning through your addiction?
That's a word that I don't use anymore because it's something I don't believe is real.
Yeah.
But we all know what we mean when we say a functioning addict, and I agree. If that is a real word, which like I say, then yeah, there was times when I was definitely a functioning addict. But the reason I don't agree with that is because just because I was maintaining a job at times or I was doing stuff, I wasn't functioning because I'm lying, I'm devious, I'm manipulative. And also, more often than not, I'm still involved in the crack house or the county lines or the shotting or the, you know, the undertone. So all I'm doing is putting a front on, and it's it's another mask, what I had the ability to wear and wear it well at times. But yeah, I never, like I said, from getting out of that rehab at 20 to being like 37, 47, sorry, to being 47, I was never clean, ever. I was either on methadone, Subutex, or on heroin and crack, always using coke, alcohol. There was even times where I'd be off the smack and the crack, I'd be drinking and sniffing coke and smoking weed, and my friends would all be like, "Oh, Jez, it's good to have you back, man. I'm glad you're clean." They would think that this is clean time because I wasn't using my drug of choice, which was heroin and crack. And they would say, "Jez, it's good to have you back." And I'd be disillusioned with that. And I'd think same. I'd be like, "Yeah, it's good to be back." Do you know what I mean? And I'd think that just using coke, not my drug of choice, weed, beer, was back.
How bad were your behaviours on the the heroin and the crack? What kind of behaviours were you displaying at that point?
So there were times where my behaviours would be very off key, a straight out menace, a problem. Do you know what I mean? To anybody and everybody, and my drugs were all that. Everything came second to drugs. Do you know what I mean? And the thing is, for an addict, which is totally different to somebody who is not an addict, we don't have a choice. It's what we call powerless. We are powerless over our disease. Our disease is addiction, and we are powerless. And so the behaviours. So in 2013, I got involved in a very violent robbery in Manchester, where we went to sell drugs and a big drug deal. And my co-D, which is your co-defendant, the person you're with, we ended up doing a very violent stabbing. And through the grace of God, the person that got harmed on this Section 18 robbery survived it, and but I got 7 years for it. And so,
what was the charge?
It was a Section 18 robbery.
Okay, so you didn't get like attempted murder?
No, but a Section 18 is a wounding with intent.
Right, okay.
And 2 Section 18s would get you a life sentence. It's a very violent charge. It's a stabbing. And it's, you know...
How old were you then, sorry?
So this 2013, what is that? It's like
11 years ago.
11, yeah. My poor maths.
So you've been out for...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. 7 years. You've been out for 7 years.
Yeah, so I got out in 2017. Do you know what I mean? So
okay.
5 years I've been out of that last charge. And and that was... I started that sentence in strange ways, which is, it's a high security jail, and it's one of the roughest jails in the country. Do you know what I mean? It's a naughty place to be. And some of my peers that were in there are high profile gangsters from across this country, and all of a sudden I realised that I'd gone from this, kid off a council estate in Mansfield Woodhouse to being somebody around my city of Nottingham, to now being in Manchester with some of the most off-key gangsters in the country. And that didn't stop me. There was a time where I started to believe my own bullshit, where I started to believe that maybe, my mum used to say, show me your friends and I'll tell you what you are. And when you put yourself around very violent gangsters, well, it speaks for itself, doesn't it? And they were my peers, do you know what I mean? Yeah. So that was... Yeah.
So that was another networking journey, was it?
Yeah, well, when I got out of that sentence in 2017, I think my addiction reached an whole nother level, because what happened is I reconnected with some friends from Nottingham, and they were moving weight, and they were doing well with the dark and the light, which is the smack and the crack, and it was moving, and they brought me in, because one of the things is I started, especially in that sort of community, and because of my age now, I'm getting older, people start looking up to you and respecting you, and they bring you in, and they sort of they used to go, oh, it's Jez, he's staunch, do you know what I mean? And they blow this smoke up your arse that you're somebody. And they brought me in with this particular crew, and they were smashing it but what that did it allowed my addiction to reach a whole nother level. And it reached a point where I'd lost all control over it at this point. There was no trying to get clean. There was no ability to even get 24 hours without drugs.
Because you had a constant supply. A
constant supply, and more or less free.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? A constant...
Dangerous.
Free
Dangerous.
But what that did it pushed my mental health down to a different depth. So, although I wasn't actually financially broke, and I did still have a job what I'd been maintaining for a while, although I wasn't financially broke like that. I wasn't the guy with the sleeping bags on the shoulder.
Which is what you expect to see from a heroin addict.
I've got a big truck and nice wheels on it and private number plate. I'm that guy. So I'm disillusioned now that I'm not an addict. I can't be an addict. Look how I'm balling. And that's how I felt. But what it did it pushed my mental health down to a whole different depth. And I did some pretty off-key shit. I'd sometimes be in crack houses. Old people would be in there, there'd be dealers, and this would all be happening. And I'd take the whole fucking house hostage. Off my head, or my mental health just shot that, I can't
paranoid.
Trust... Yeah. And so I can remember a very bad one where I did that naked. What they would have been thinking, I don't know, but my mental health was shot. Gone. So yeah, it were quite a...
So almost like a psychosis sort of.
It is a psychosis.
Yeah, it's a psychosis.
It's an induced psychosis by the levels of crack, which as we know is coke. It's, you know, you do 3-4 days without any sleep. Even you can even get sleep psychosis, but nevertheless when you're chucking 2 powerful drugs in there like heroin and crack, and snowballing them, as you know, that's injecting them simultaneously.
Well, I don't know what snowballing is. Explain it, okay.
Snowball.
So can you just explain, heroin is heroin an upper or is it a lower?
No, so heroin's a downer.
That's
the sort of drug where you'd take it, you would be like melting into your chair, you know, you'd be nodding in and out of sort of like this semi-consciousness, and you know, you'd be rubbing and scratching, and you're in this like sort of subdued state. And but then coke or crack, they're gonna have you pinging about, they're gonna have you sweating, they're gonna have you with your shirt off, chatting absolute shit, do you know what I mean? And possibly confrontational and, you know, very
cocky,
scatty.
yeah.
Now a dangerous thing to do, which I did regular, would snowball it, would mix crack and smack together, which is an upper and a downer, and then inject that. And that is dangerous as you
I can imagine. Well, you must mess with your heart rate, right?
You get this immense kind of euphoric feeling off the heroin with the rush of the coke, which is in the crack, and it's kind of this...
Because the thing is, I suppose after a certain point, you stop getting high, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to be inventive and you've got to start making these stupid, like snowballing, I suppose it's one of those where you just want a bit of a rush.
Yeah. And so the dangerous thing with all that is like you said, is you're chasing it's an insatiable appetite for more. And so then your behaviour becomes more erratic because your mental health starts to really plummet to the point where to anybody on the outside world, you're just nuts. You're just suffering with psychosis. They don't know that it's an induced psychosis. You're not making sense. You're confrontational, and everything starts to fall by the wayside. And then there was a point where the girl I was with at the time and family was starting to realise that, wow, this is a different level of appallingness that you are suffering. And
were they aware of your previous drug problems?
Yeah. My family had always been aware that, because don't forget, anybody who was close to me, you're not hiding being a smackhead and a crackhead. No. Do you know what I mean? You're not hiding that. But to anybody who's not close to me, who just sees that, don't he do the electrical work, they'd think about me, and don't he the footballer, and they know my behaviour off key, and I'd been in and out of jail, and they perhaps thought I used drugs on some level, but people had no idea to what extent, to what it was happening behind the scenes. And that's when another friend who'd already got clean reached out to me, which I'd had many a friend do, but one friend said to me, look, I wanted you to come with me to a fellowship and and see what you think about trying to get into this recovery life. Well, the reason that seemed appealing to me was my psychosis was so poorly at this point, suicide started to feel like a very real option, because I knew I didn't want this life of addiction. I didn't know how to counter it. I'd been to drug services, I'd been on scripts, and I'd sort of juggled in and out of all these different services, but none of them felt like they could offer me what it were I required. None of them felt like they could give me this. I used to say this, and I think many of addict does, these drug services are shit, they don't help you. I didn't feel like there was anything there for me. A script weren't doing it, and I wasn't getting this sort of something that I required. It just wasn't there. And a friend took me to a fellowship, and one of the things they say at this fellowship at the beginning, they say if anyone has any drugs or paraphernalia on them, can they please take it outside before the meeting starts? And I'd have a crack pipe in my pocket, and when everybody in the interval went for a cigarette, I'd go in the toilets, and I was smoking crack at these meetings and standing on the toilet and blowing it into the extractor fan. That's how off key I was, and that's how little respect I had for anything.
But it still took the first step to walk through the door.
Yeah. And I think a seed was planted.
Yeah.
And while I was there, I started seeing people who was now in recovery, And initially I weren't really convinced that these people were all really as clean as they said they were. He was saying he's 20 years clean, and he's saying he's 6 years clean and 16 months clean. I weren't really convinced that they were. I used to think maybe they still have a little drink or smoke a little spliff, but I'd be happy if I could get to that point. They started talking to me about going to rehab, saying, Jez, you're going to need to get to rehab. But one of the things the disease of addiction does, because it wants to keep us trapped in that madness, is it tells us lies that sound plausible but untrue. And one of the lies it tells us is, you can't go to rehab because you've got a job, you've got a house, you've got a missus. And it could be as simple as you've got a dog you'll have to look after, or I see my kids on the weekend.
Excuses.
They make all these excuses, but it just keeps you trapped for longer. And one of the things I often say now is, a man is rewarded in public for what he does in private. So off to rehab, I eventually decided to go to fix this suicidal, psychotic sort of person that I'd started to become. I was very fortunate that I landed, quite serendipitous really, I landed in a very good rehab and started this journey of recovery. And one of the things which was a shock to me was I went to rehab just like I did 27 years prior to learn how to manage my drink and drug use. I wanted to go in rehab. When I came out,
be able to have a drink and that.
I wanted to be able to go on an all-inclusive holiday and be able to manage my drink and drug use the same as everybody else does. Watch the odd football match and get off my bonnet, but then just leave it alone. So I went to rehab to learn to do that. And I think it was easily within my first month of being there, they said, there's only one thing you've got to change. And I thought, oh, I like the sound of this. This sounds easy. And they went, Jeremy, it's everything. And at first I thought that was a bit of a cliche. The only one thing I've got to change is everything. But I realised it was true. It was true. The one thing I had to change was everything, right? And the most important thing I learned when I got there, what they taught me is, yes, Jez, we can teach you how to manage your drink and drug use. Don't do it. Ever.
It's the easiest way, just cut it out, yeah. Well, it's not the easiest,
but it's the only way. The only way. And when I heard that, initially, I was shocked that I was never going to be able to use drink and drugs again. But then what they said to me is, we'll break it down simply, and we'll just do just for today. We can nickname it JFT. Just got to not do drink and drugs for today. And so that's what I started doing. I started doing this process of not using drink and drugs a day at a time, keeping it in the moment, keeping it simple, and allowing that process to sort of be absorbed. And so when I use the word now, being in recovery, it's not just a case that I allowed my body to recover from drink and drugs, because that's a process in itself, and it allows certain people to get that cognitive power back to start to make rational decisions. But for an addict, somebody who actually has a real problem with drink and drugs, we need to do more than just allow the body to recover. We're actually trying to recover the mind. By trying to recover the mind, we do what's called a spiritual journey. This is like a non-religious but spiritual program. And with spirituality, I heard a beautiful thing recently said, and they said, religion is for people who don't want to go to hell, but spirituality is for people who've been to hell and don't want to go back.
Wow.
And so I started this spiritual journey of recovery, and then it allowed more than just my physical body to start to recover. It allowed my brain and me mentally to start to be able to recover and start to become somebody very different to I would have been prior to starting this journey. So I'm now in recovery.
And you'll still continue to be in recovery.
Yeah, and so one of the things with this recovery journey is I'm 17 months at the moment, total abstinence, total sobriety. I don't smoke, I don't vape, obviously I don't use any drink or drugs in any form. And one of the things that we advocate for to each other is that recovery is an ongoing process. Our medicine is the fellowships that we're a part of, and is the recovery network that we're in and the recovery crew that we do. And as long as I continue to take my medicine, which is to keep doing the recovery stuff, reading the literature, getting to the meetings, speaking to other addicts, speaking to my sponsor, speaking to my sponsees, and as long as I stay in that process of taking my medicine, I'll be okay. But if we don't continue to do this progressing, if we're not progressing, we're regressing. So this is recovery for me will be the rest of my life. For addicts, a friend recently reached out to me and asked this question. He said, Jez, do you think I'm an addict? And I said, there's one way you can answer this if you're an addict or not me. If you have to delete numbers out of your phone because you can't trust yourself to not ring a dealer, if you have to lie, if you find it's causing you pain, if you're losing money through it and falling out with loved ones, you quite possibly are. But more importantly, if you're saying to yourself every day, I don't want to do this tomorrow, and then you're most likely an addict, because that's not normal behaviour. And then this is where we have to start this life of sobriety or abstinence.
Yeah, amazing. So what are you using? Which group is it you're using?
So I'm part of NA, which is Narcotics Anonymous.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's CA and there's AA, and there's other stuff you can do. There's smart recoveries, there's groups, and there's therapeutic places, and there's people that do it through faith and religion. But for me, I'm a big advocate for this. Stay in your recovery process. For me, a spiritual journey has allowed me to start to understand more about myself than I've ever thought were possible. And one of the biggest things we say, the fellowship I'm a part of, is primary purpose is our recovery. Then our next primary purpose is to carry the message to the addict who still suffers, and that is selfless acts. And in doing selfless acts towards others, there's something quite beautiful about that whole process. Do you know what I mean? It's quite rewarding that you do something for nothing for somebody. And it's not giving... I've just seen an homeless guy on the way here, and I didn't give him £1, but what I did was I gave him 5 minutes of my time to let him know that I care, and I do, even though I'd never met the guy before. And I gave him just a little bit of direction on where he could try and help himself move forward with his life. I think that's more powerful than £1.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So your Recovery Crew page on TikTok, you obviously you're doing a really good job of spreading the message, you know, just even having those reminders, don't pick up today.
Yeah.
Just those little moments of where you can see sense by having someone speak to you, which I think is really nice that you're doing that. Have you had a lot of people reach out to you?
Yeah, I have actually. And so when people do reach out to me, because of my dyslexia, and I struggle to do the reading and the writing.
Right.
I read it, but then messaging back can sometimes be long for me. I always try and make sure I reply for a start, especially if it's hit my DMs. I always try and make sure I reply to anybody who hits my DMs. And then if it's girls that reach out, I often send them a link for women's Zoom meetings and stuff that's going to help them more direct for women. And if it's guys that reach out, I sometimes do get a little bit more involved and see. But it depends where these people are. If they're local to me at the time, Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, I know all the meetings in them sort of areas. But if you're further afield, I can just do a little bit of signposting or a little bit of directing as to what things you should do, really, because everyone's journey can be quite different. There's a bit of a blueprint, and I think that we need to work to, but everyone's journey can be quite different. But one thing I do advocate for is not just having clean time, not just trying to... Clean time's a brilliant starting point, and it's essential for recovery. But once you've got a bit of clean time, basically within your first 2 or 3 weeks, then you need to start a recovery process, because if you don't start to understand why and who the addict is within you, you can't prevent it from coming back.
Right. And that's what these fellowships do. They help you to understand. They go through the psychology in your past.
Well, it's not so what happens is on a spiritual journey, when it's a 12-step program, is like a powerful step is a step 1. And in a step 1, it asks all sorts of questions. It's like doing a degree on your SEN. And it asks all sorts of questions like, what proof do I have that I can't use drink and drugs successfully? And obviously when I answer that question is this: I have 30 5 years plus proof that I can't use drink and drugs successfully. The jail I did, the divorce I went through, a multitude of things explained to me why I can't. And the fact that I've tried and tried and tried and it just causes me pain and pain and pain. So it reiterates stuff like that. And there's all different steps that I like, different parts of this spiritual journey. That one specifically, a step 3 is making more of a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understand. It doesn't have to be the God that they've talked about in the Bible or the Quran.
Yeah, you're right.
God can be good, orderly direction. So it can be an acronym. And you can just use the universe as your higher power. Anything can be your higher power.
Yes, I think a lot of the CA and the AA before used to be seen as a very religious thing, didn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas obviously now obviously it's more wider now, so that people don't feel so pressured to have that one.
No, I think it's important. It does say in the literature, at the preamble at the beginning, it does say this is a spiritual, non-religious program. I have quite a few friends who are atheists and don't believe. But like I say, they use the word God as the acronym of good orderly direction. They connect with the universe. Whereas I use prayer, and I do have a God of my understanding, they have meditation. They use meditation. And I'm a great believer in like anything like that. So whether it be meditation or whether it be positive affirmations, they reinforce what you're doing. There's a lot of power in the spoken word.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So what does your day look like now for you? Like, how does your day look?
Yeah, so now, it's quite a beautiful process what's happened for me. So I did the rehab thing, I got out of rehab, then I became a big part of NA within my community across Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, where I attend all different sorts of meetings and whatever's happening. And just recently, these last couple of weeks, I've been offered some volunteering positions at different recovery hubs. So a really good one in Lichfield, what's a beautiful place. And then there's the other one that I'm doing is part of Derbyshire, which is part of where I live. I'm going to say the names of them actually. Do you know what I mean? The one in Lichfield's Better Ways, brilliant place. The one in Derby/Nottingham, what I'm now a part of, is called New Hope. It's supported housing. And then the big one in Nottingham, where I'm not started yet, but I've been offered a place to go and do some volunteering, is called Nottingham Recovery Network. And then the treatment centre I went through was called Jericho House. Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, but you don't have to be, for the treatment centre, you don't have to be from Derby to go to it. You could be from London, you can be from Scotland.
Okay. That's like a rehab, is it?
Yeah, that's like a rehab. And another thing I think is really important to get across to some people what might not know this, I thought rehabs were only for people with a lot of paper, who, you know,
I was going to ask,
and all these people to turn up to. No, if you're on benefits, if you're on universal credit, you can be eligible for rehabs all around the country. What will take you on your universal credit and your PIP, and that will pay for it while you're there. So people can't say they can't afford these things. And I think there's something more powerful about them ones than you do pay for. Because the ones you pay for, sometimes people get there and then they sort of a bit, I'm not putting up with this shit, you know, because they've paid a lot of money to come here and not to listen to you tell me this. Whereas when you've benefits have paid for you to go there, you've gone there because you know you need it. And so when they tell you, hopefully it sticks a bit more. So they have really good success rates. And so all these sort of places, I do believe that wherever you are, wherever you're from, you've got to stop letting your addiction run your life. You've got to start taking ownership for who you are and be accountable and get involved with these places and ask the questions and keep trying, because the biggest tool that we have is the not giving in. But don't stay in the hamster wheel of trying to fight our addiction and learn to manage it, because all that keeps us in that perpetual pain. What we have to do is break that with the truth that I am better, I can be better. Do you know what I mean? Perfect. Yeah.
And what would be your message, other than that, for anyone else who is in addiction at the moment? Is there anything that you think that you could say?
My message to anybody in addiction is you are worth it, you are beautiful, and there's a power within you, and you've got to unleash that. Don't give in to the dark thoughts of, you know, I'm not worth it, my life's always been grim and it always will be grim. One of the best words we have is faith. Have faith. Bless.
George Michael. Gotta have faith. Well, thank you so much for coming. Is there anything else you want to put on? Anything else you want to say on
No,
here?
I'm very grateful for you giving me this opportunity to come and share the message. If anybody don't follow me on TikTok, do. And if anybody don't follow you on TikTok, then please do. Exactly.
We'll tag everything below as well on the YouTube.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, but thank you so much for coming in today. And we'll do some more stuff hopefully in the future.
Nice.